Hello, I'm Terrence McNally. Welcome to Freeforum, a world that just might work. This episode was recorded as a LiveTalksLA event, September 18th, 2025, in Santa Monica, California. In it, I speak with author and activist Bill McKibben about his new book, Here Comes the Sun, and you can learn more at Bill McKibben, BILLMCKIBBEN, BillMcKibben1word.com, and at thirdact.org. On Freeforum, we explore the lives, the work, the ideas of individuals that I suspect have pieces of the puzzle of a world that just might work. We look at politics, economics, environment, science, health, culture, all based on the fact that I believe we can do better, and I want to find out how. The show streams weekly on the Progressive Voices Network on TuneIn.com, and podcasts are available anytime, anywhere on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, most major podcast sites, and at my site, terrencemcnally.net, TERRENCEMCNALLY, all one word, terrencemcnally.net. For Christmas 35 years ago, my younger brother gave me Bill McKibben's book, The End of Nature, the first mass audience book about climate change. What Bill has done in those 35 plus years is remarkable. His contributions regarding climate go beyond his 20 books and countless articles, though one in Rolling Stone 2012's Global Warming's Terrifying New Math changed the way many looked at energy reserves and made the case for the fossil fuel divestment movement. Bill's a co-founder of not one, but two activist organizations. In 2008, the Global Climate Campaign 350.org, among the most effective climate or activist organizations in the world, and in 2021, Third Act, the pro-democracy, anti-climate change organization for folks 60 and older. He's the author of 20 books. My favorites are The End of Nature and Deep Economy. At a time when so much can feel dark, his new book, Here Comes the Sun, offers hope, but not with happy talk. It begins with a clear declaration of facts and includes marching orders for action. Good evening, Bill McKibben.
First of all, I just want to say what a pleasure it is. We've done interviews over the years many times. Our earliest was 2002, but this is the first time, I think, in person, and certainly the first time at LiveTalksLA. I like folks to get a feel for the people behind the work and the ideas and the books and things that we talk about. And the question that I've asked you before, but I think is such an interesting one, is how you mix being an author, a writer, a kind of a solitary profession, with being an activist.
That's a good question, and I'm in many ways an accidental activist. The thing I know really how to do in the world is write, and that's what I did for a very long time. But when I was writing The End of Nature, when I was 27, I guess, it became very clear to me that I was no longer, objective in the way that, newspaper reporters were supposed to be. I cared about the outcome. I did not want the planet to overheat and, the climate system to be destroyed. But I kept, for the next 10 years, just writing and speaking. Because I think, like many writers and academics, which I sometimes am too, our sense of the world is that it's, we're engaged in an argument, and if we win the argument, then the world will, the leaders of the world will do what they should. And it really took me a while to figure out that we had won the argument. There was no doubt what was happening with the world's climate, but we were losing the fight because the fight, was not about data and reason and evidence, though you had to win the argument, that you could still lose the fight because it was about what fights are always about, money and power. And that we were going to have to assemble some power, and it wasn't going to come from billions of dollars the way that it does for Exxon. It was going to come from building movements. That's the only, for my money, the two great inventions of the 20th century are going to turn out to have been the solar cell and the nonviolent social movement. And I think it'll be some combination, perhaps, of those two things that bails us out if we do indeed get bailed out. But that's when I, against my instincts, started to build organizations and so on. And in that work, my only guide really has been Tom Sawyer, the whitewashing of the fence scene where I do my best to make it seem like it might be a good and interesting thing to do, and then happily enormous numbers of people like the third actors who are here tonight appear to actually do the work that I have suggested. It's been a really, in those ways, a very beautiful quarter century of that kind of work. But you're right, it doesn't fit at heart. As much as I enjoy being here with everybody, given my druthers, I'd rather be home typing. That's really my, who I am. So.
Sweet spot, yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to mention two things before we get any further. One is just a personal note. I learned that you actually, as a very young child, lived in Altadena.
Yeah, actually the house of my earliest boyhood memories burned down on day 2 of the fire. So yeah, and I have, I was 5 when we left California and returned to the East Coast, but I do have a kind of natal affection for the Golden State and all its extraordinary beauty.
And the other thing is just to say that I am a member, a volunteer, quite involved with Third Act. I help write the newsletter, and for any of you who are not, if you qualify, that is, if you give a shit and you're 60 or more, I highly recommend it. I remember when you first came out here with some of your co-founders of 350, I went to an event at UCLA, a long, long time ago, and that was an enormous success. And then talk a little bit about 350 and how you decided to make the transition to Third Act.
Well, 350 happily is, on good, in good stead, and was doing fine. I organized a lot with young people, which I love doing. It's a wonderful privilege to get to do that. It was a wonderful privilege to be in this auditorium this afternoon with the whole senior class from this school and just talking with them, and we really had a good time. But I heard there was so much good organizing going on among young people, especially sort of at the height of Greta's advocacy and things, that I heard a few too many people my age basically say, it's up to the next generation to solve these problems, which A, does not strike me as particularly morally defensible stance, but B, also strikes me as highly impractical. The kind of insight, if I had an insight about all this or a guess, it was that structural power rests very firmly in the hands of older Americans. Much of the country's resources have ended up in our hands. We have a lifetime of skills and connections, and we're politically powerful even beyond our numbers just because we all vote. There is, as I have said, no known way to stop old people from voting. So it's the counter to this, and what people said as we were first talking about building Third Act was, it won't work because people become more conservative as they age, and so on. And that may have been true at some point in history, I don't know. But I think very much not true with people our age right now. Because if you are in your third act, if you're in your 60s, 70s, 80s now, it means that your first act was in this moment of great social and cultural and political transformation and liberation in the 60s and 70s. I mean, you were at Harvard in 1969 during the great strikes, you know, and so on. I think that that's sort of muscle memory, generational DNA. And so
as I say, can we live up to our early promise?
So it is proved to be. We've got 100,000 people now, the working groups that, and you know, Zan and Phil and everybody else here, the groups that people have put together and built are doing extraordinary work. And it turns out that in an American democracy that so many people have given up on, a group of 400 or 500 people in emerging in a state, in Kentucky, in Northern California, in Vermont, in any place, is enough to exert extraordinary power in state capitals and city halls and things. That's one of the secrets of American politics. So few people are actually engaged in it that if you get in, you can have tremendous outsized influence. The right figured that out 25 years ago and went to work on it, and that explains a lot of where we are now, you know. The thing that I hadn't figured out when we started, though I should have, because it's just a mathematical truism, I mean, the one problem with organizing young people is they don't stay young very long, you know. Next thing you know, they're 25 and having a kid or, you know, absorbed in their career or whatever. If we can organize people when they're, you know, 63, just statistically, they may be doing this for the next quarter century, you know, in good ways.
Good investment.
And that's very heartening to me. It's very heartening to me, but it's really very heartening to young people. You know, we talk all the time about the climate anxiety and despair among young people, which is very real. But it's my experience from talking to kids a lot is that it's not rooted as much in a fear of what physically is going to happen on the planet as it is in a sense that they have been abandoned to deal with it on their own, that they somehow have to figure out how to, and the kind of palpable relief when, I mean, I've told the story often, but the first demonstration we did at Third Act was when a bunch of young people, we really hadn't formed it, we were just in the process of kind of this fleshing out this idea, when a group of young people from Greta's Fridays for the Future movement called up and said, we want to take on these banks that are funding the fossil fuel industry, but we don't have credit cards, you know, or checking accounts, whatever. Will you come help? And I was like, whatever else you can say about us, we definitely have credit cards, so we will be there. And we had a demonstration in Boston, and there were 300 or 400 high school kids there, because high school kids, as I was reminded again this afternoon, fully understand the barrel of the gun down which they are staring. And they're somewhat sprier, so they were at the head of the march. And at the back of the march, there was a group of us from this nascent Third Act with a banner that just said, "Fossils against fossil fuels," you know? And the kids were like, yeah, they were pumped up about it. So that's the spirit in which we've tried to operate all along. This book is very odd for me, because my general role in the world has been as a bearer of bad news, you know, a professional bummer outer of other human beings. And there is more to be bummed out about right now than any time in my life by a large margin. Not only is the planet's climate system in a state of extraordinary crisis and worse with each passing week, happening, the degradation now in just real time. But also, of course, our democracy is flickering and faltering in ways that I think none of us ever quite imagined. And it's, you know, more, again, every hour. The thought that the President of the United States is now firing the hosts of late night talk shows because he doesn't like the jokes they've made about him is so incomprehensible to how we conceived of America until a few weeks ago, that it's easy to be completely stunned by all of that. And I think actually that's the strategy, is to do things so rapidly and aggressively that we end up stunned. In the midst of all that, there is this one big good thing happening on the planet. And it's really only happened over the last 36 months or so. This sudden, explosive growth of clean energy around the world. And it's such a big and good thing that I think it's capable of taking a bite out of not just the climate crisis, but the authoritarianism crisis at the same time. And so, yeah, we want to drive as powerfully as we can this idea into the body politic. And if I had to sum up the thing that we want to accomplish, and the reason I wrote the book and everything else, is to just get across the idea that what we've called alternative energy for the last 40 years is no longer the alternative. It's the obvious, common sense, straightforward way to power the planet. 95% of new electric generation around the world last year came from the sun, the wind, and
95%
of new generation.
Of new.
Yeah, and the growth is so the world produced a third more power from the sun this summer than it did last summer. The pace, we're on the very steep part of this S-curve, and we have to accelerate. We have to keep that exponential growth going. And if we can, for even 4 or 5 years, we will have reached a point where A, we've broken the political power of the fossil fuel industry, and B, we've really reset the trajectory. We're not going to stop global warming. That is not an option on the menu. But we can, and I think will be able, hopefully, to start shaving tenths of a degree off how hot the planet gets. And every tenth of a degree that we raise the temperature takes another 100 million of our brothers and sisters out of a safe climate zone into a dangerous one. So really, nothing else that humans have ever done in their lives is as important as, has as much leverage as even reducing the temperature 4 or 5 tenths of a degree that we eventually are going to settle at. But beyond that, what's really, so that's the reason that I wrote the book, and it's the reason that we're doing Sunday. It's a very practical, utilitarian, economic argument rooted in the fact that as of about 5 years ago, this is the cheapest way to make power on the planet.
It was the cleanest. It's now the cleanest,
yes,
and the cheapest.
Exactly.
And one other thing that occurs to me is when you say cleanest, what that means is that the costs afterwards, the health costs,
absolutely.
all of those things.
And we were talking about that earlier today. By any rational economic calculation, we should have done this 40 years ago. The price of raising the temperature of the Earth is, exceeds any economic. If you had to pay 10 times as much for solar energy, it would still be a great bargain compared with having to pay for a fundamentally broken world. But we weren't going to do it until it passed that line. And now we live on a planet where the cheapest way to make power is to point a sheet of glass at the sun. But the thing that writing the book really made me think about and understand in a deeper way is that that's only half of the appeal here. The other half is that this is a very different way and a very liberating way of starting to produce energy. We've relied on an energy source, fossil fuel, that's only available in a few places, so it's easy to control by a few people, and it's very susceptible to being held in reserve, hoarded, and doled out to over time. And what we can replace it with is an energy source that's available literally everywhere to everyone, that can't be held in reserve, and that can't, just do the thought experiment of thinking about what the last 100 years, the politics of the world would have been like had in that period oil been of relatively trivial value. How many wars, coups, assassinations, terrorist plots, everything else might we have avoided? How much inequality might we have avoided? The first modern plutocrat, the first oligarch, was John D. Rockefeller, because he figured out that control of fossil fuel was the ticket to theretofore unknown amount of money and power. And the people who followed him have been much worse than he was. Our biggest oil and gas barons in this country for the last 30 years, 40 years have been the Koch brothers. They own more refining and pipeline capacity than anyone else. And they've used their winnings to systematically erode our democracy. If you wonder why it was so easy for Donald Trump to kick over the pillars of our country, it's because they were rotten. They'd been rotted out systematically from within for a long time.
Right, they didn't even just use that wealth to concentrate their power and in the fossil fuel industry. They decided they were going to remake society.
Yes. And look at Europe. The biggest oil and gas baron is Vladimir Putin, who's decided he's going to remake the map of Europe. And as of last week, was probing the defenses of Poland with his drones. Anyone who's even thought a little about the history of the 20th century, the idea that Russia is currently probing the defenses of Poland should send a significant chill down your spine. Humans are very good at starting wars about lots of things. I think they will be hard-pressed to figure out how to fight one over sunshine, I think it's a very different world on the other side of this. And I think this is the single physical thing we could do most likely to kind of erode and subvert the current balance of power on this. So in so many ways, it's it's liberating, and it's even, I dare say, quite beautiful. We were doing a playlist the other day for songs on Spotify for About the Sun. There were almost literally endless list. I obviously stole the title of the book from George Harrison, and that's in some ways the most beautiful and by far the most streamed of all the songs in the Beatles catalog by a large margin. But there are 100 other great ones that if you even start thinking for a minute, Stevie Wonder and Bill Withers and everybody who's ever in the pantheon. And someone, but it really drove it home to me when someone said, well, what if we did a playlist of songs about fracking? How many would there be? None. Because I think that we're just literally going to be, over time, drawn to energy from heaven instead of hell, We obviously don't know how prehistoric people really thought about the world. But the evidence that they've left behind, every interesting pile of rocks that's around there seems to line up with the solstice or the equinox, It seems to have been top of mind for people as far back as we can go. And I think that there's a deep beauty about our local star, which already gives us light and warmth, and via photosynthesis our supper, also being willing to provide all the power that we could ever need. It just allows us to think about restarting what seems to me a fairly broken civilization at this point on somewhat new terms. And that's, since I now have a 18-month-old grandson, i.e. I know and love someone who will be alive in the 22nd century, it seems incumbent to try and figure out if there might be some other terms on which we might, which that might not be the dismal era that it currently seems slated to become. So,
You have a great supermarket metaphor, which I will allow you to say rather than me.
I was thinking about it. I was in Portland yesterday and was wandering around and went into the Whole Foods. We don't really have any of that in rural Vermont where I live, but I know that the way that I've been explaining where we are with people is just to say, we've for a long time thought of alternative energy as, I think, as like the Whole Foods of energy. It's like nice but pricey, kind of for special people, when in fact it's now just the Costco of energy. It's cheap, it's available in bulk, it's on the shelf ready to go, and I think if we can get that across, it'll really help. One of the things that's so interesting about all this is the degree to which a lot of the affection for solar energy in particular crosses ideological and party lines. Because it can mean different things to different people. So I've lived in rural America my whole life, some of it in blue state Vermont, much of it in red districts. I've spent much of my life in Elise Stefanik's district in upstate New York. So I have lots and lots of Trumpy neighbors, lots of people with Trump flags in their home, and people I'm in the volunteer fire department with or whatever. And a lot of them have solar panels on the roof. And so, when I talk to them, I know why they do. It's not because they're worried about climate change. It's because my house is my castle, which I am completely prepared to defend with my AR-15, and I like having an independent power supply for my castle. Now, that's not why I put up my solar panels a quarter century ago. But I understand that. I'm enough of an American to understand that feeling. Not the AR-15 part necessarily, but my house, I like feeling like my house is my place, and I love the fact that I can produce, the things that I need in the same way that I love, the food from the garden, So I wrote a piece last week for The Guardian saying the people who should be most attracted to solar panels, and who increasingly are sort of nutty right-wing preppers. Because if you really think that you're going to be holed up in your bunker for a long time, if you go on the prepper forums and things on Reddit, there are endless discussions by people about how they're going to keep their diesel tanks working, and what if they grow algae? Here's the algae side you should pour in them, on and on and on. It's just like, what are you talking about? If you get solar panels on the roof, you're never going to have to. I went back and watched the Mad Max movies from the early 1980s, and the plot points are all about, crisscrossing the desert to try and find derelict oil tankers so that you can get more oil. That's what they're fighting over all the time, so, to maintain their stuff, because these were made in 1980. Well, if you were making those movies in Australia now, 40% of homes have solar panels on the roof. You don't need, Mad Max would be just like Chill Max, like, whatever, the world's coming to an end, but I can run my pina colada machine off my, solar panels on the roof. Everything's good, So it's like any truly huge transformative thing, it has lots of different possibilities. If you have a solar array, it produces two things. One is electrons, and the other is shade, which on an overheating planet is a really interesting commodity, because shade means, among other things, moisture retention. There's just been a series of studies that Californians will be interested in, showing that in desert environments, that retained moisture that comes from that shade is allowing the biotic crust, the fragile desert biotic crust to grow much, much faster. And I mean, we've lost this over much of the world. It's regrowing very quickly both in American desert and in the Chinese desert, where we have a much bigger set of data to draw on. But in agricultural places, I mean, this is like a whole new tabula rasa for a whole new human endeavor. It currently operating under the very awkward name of agrovoltaics, but completely fascinating. In Vermont, where I live, what we do with a lot of the solar farms is plant the space in between the rows with pollinator-friendly flowers and weeds. And the number of pollinating insects goes up 100 times above what it would be in a cornfield or something, which is astonishing, because we need a lot more pollinating insects. The farmers around the edges of these things report that fruit set in their orchards goes up 35–40%. It's kind of a miracle to just watch, you just plant these things, and then lots of insects that people thought had been extirpated from Vermont, somehow news spreads on their,
their
whatever
networks,
the network is, and they appear out of nowhere and are back. I was just writing the other day about a new series of studies from France demonstrating that yields for wine grapes are up 60% when they're grown in and amongst. So, I mean, I'm a beer guy, so what does this do for me? Nothing. But I know that Californians have a affection for, and so I mean, it's just, there's so many interesting things that happen when you start imagining something past the kind of monoculture of energy that we've existed with and instead a kind of flexible, nimble use of the sun and the wind and the batteries to store their power when the sun goes down.
Right. And as we sort of glanced over at one point, when you decentralize the fuel power, you decentralize the political power.
Exactly.
And a society that moves in that direction is where I think an awful lot of people want to go. I want to talk about other countries briefly, except before I do, I just want to touch on one thing that's very local, which is Prop 50. Prop 50, okay. Since, as I said, Third Act is a democracy and a climate movement.
Winning the midterm elections appears to be the last avenue of some hope for slowing down this craziness that we're living through. Yeah, I mean, I'm grateful that California took a lead in independent, districting and non-partisan, but that's not the game that's being played right now. And if someone, I won the Gandhi Peace Prize. I have a kind of nonviolent bent. But if someone smashes you in the face, you have to figure out some way to keep them from doing it over and over and over again. And this strikes me as a completely justified way to do it. We'd be doing it in Vermont too, but we only have one representative, so there's no use redistricting.
I didn't realize that. Wow.
But we have two senators, just like you guys. So I have
same as us.
I have no idea why California puts up with the United States, and my guess is that if things continue on the current path, California won't put up with the United States forever.
In the green room, he said he assumes we'll secede at some point, which opened my eyes.
In Vermont's defense, I will say that, we have done a good job with our two senators.
That's true.
They've been helpful to the rest of the country. So
I once told Bernie, actually, that I said, just consider yourself the third senator of California.
There you go.
Come out here and raise all the money you want. Briefly, because there's so much to talk about some other countries. So, China.
When historians look back at the last 6 months in our country, they'll talk a lot about the demise of at least temporarily, of democracy here. But I think that probably in world historical terms, the main thing that's happened in the last 6 months is that the United States has effectively conceded the technological, economic, and therefore probably political future to China. We've decided to try and get the last dregs of wealth that are going to come out of 18th century technology, and we've given them free rein on technology invented in the United States, but now of literally no interest to us, to the White House. The first solar cell, 1954, Edison, New Jersey, Bell Labs, funded basically by Americans dropping dimes in payphones, the first commercial wind turbine, 1943, 30 miles south of where I live on the spine of the Green Mountains. These are things that, American ingenuity of that, amazing era produced. And now, literally 2 weeks ago, we shut down work on a 90% finished wind farm off the coast of New England. We're basically ready to plug in and go. Billions of dollars invested, tens of thousands of people at work just stopped for no reason that anyone's even bothered to explain, beyond the fact that the fossil fuel industry is scared of renewable energy, and the president is still pissed off, but having to look at a windmill from the 9th fairway of his Scottish golf course. That's almost incomprehensible. In fact, if it continues, it really will be incomprehensible. Like archaeologists will be 1,000 years from now scratching their heads to explain why there are a series of odd, pointless pylons in the Atlantic Ocean. Was there some odd religious cult that had, and the answer to that will be sort of yes. There was, and I said the other day, I said to you that, if we keep it up, 10 years from now, if we still give tourist visas to people to come here, it'll be to look at the, colonial Williamsburg of internal combustion, to see how people did things in the olden times, because the rest of the world is moving dramatically in this direction. So China is producing huge amounts of clean energy itself, but it's also now exporting that technology down all its trade routes. So one of the stories in the book is about what happened last year in Pakistan.
Yeah, I definitely wanted you to tell that one.
Pakistan, country hit hardest by climate change, if any on earth. Just desperate. Right now there's another big flood in the Punjab and a lot of people out of their homes. And the temperature in its cities, routinely 126 degrees, in the summer. Just at the literal edge of human ability to survive. Their one geographic advantage is a long border with China, across which have begun to flow these cheap solar panels. Lots of people exporting them because Pakistan's electric grid is expensive and unreliable. So there was a ready market. This was not a government program, but you could watch just from Google Earth the tops of buildings in Karachi and Islamabad last year, just every flat surface getting, and it was just people buying these things, going on YouTube and TikTok and watching videos about how to snap them together and doing the work. They built the equivalent of half the country's national electric grid in 8 months out of solar panels.
This is a country of 100 million. Half of its grid in less than a year.
And the, Pakistani farmers, for whom diesel is often their biggest input, because you've got deep tube wells from the Green Revolution that you need to bring water up for irrigation. They were adopting early adopters here. They usually lacked the money to build the racks on which we just laid them on the ground. Pakistanis used 35% less diesel last year than they did the year before. This is now happening. In the last 6 months, we've seen about a 60% increase in the spread of solar into Africa. along all the routes, along all the sort of Chinese trade routes through this area. And that's, significant and also beautiful, because there are 600 million Africans without real access to electricity. I mean, fossil fuel had 250 years to reach them and do something about it, and it did not. So now they're going to get and are getting their first power from the sun. And I've been all through that part of the world watching this happen. And here, it's great, but it doesn't change your experience.
Right,
you flip the light switch and it comes on, whether it's coal or solar power that's doing it. You have to, but there, I was sitting I remember vividly sitting in a village in Ghana that had put up its microgrid solar panels the day before, and sitting with the village elders who kept giving me bottles of water, cold bottles of water to drink. Since I'm a Vermonter, the heat of Ghana is bad, much more than I can. So I was very grateful for all these cold bottles of water, but it took me, in my clueless Western way, 20 minutes to figure out that the reason they were so proud to be doing this was that until the day before, there had never been anything cold in that village. They'd never had a refrigerator. The real reason, the deep reason that they wanted a refrigerator was so that they could keep vaccines refrigerated. I did not meet anywhere in Ghana any anti-vax, these are, people without the luxury of, becoming nutty in some of the ways that we have now decided to become. But they also just, they also had like some popsicles and stuff, and you just got some sense of what a great thing it is to have some electricity to work with, So China is, I've spent a lot of time in China. I'm glad that that's not where I was born, because if I'd pursued the work that I have pursued in my life, I would have spent it rotting in jail in China. That may happen here too, at this point. But in terms of responsibility to the rest of the world, I'm not prepared to make the argument that, that it's a great shame that China is going to be leading. They're doing stuff that's going to be of great help to the rest of the planet, and we are not. It's going to be very weird to watch. The global climate talks are this year in November in Brazil, and for the first time, the U.S. will not be participating in any way. The country that poured the most carbon into the atmosphere is now officially the only country not participating in the global effort to do anything about it. That's bad, but actually, I suspect that the global talks around climate will become much more fruitful going forward without us in the way to prevent certain kinds of progress. We shall see.
For it to be a treaty, you would have to get 2/3 of the Senate, right? So, as you say, they all knew that wasn't going to happen.
After the Kyoto,
so
everyone
you'd go
figured
with
out.
compacts and voluntary. Without us,
Yeah. And this is very painful for me to say, because through it all, I'm somewhat of a patriot. I grew up in Lexington, Massachusetts. My summer job was giving tours of the battle green where the first, first shots of the revolution were fired. I take with great pleasure the idea that this country was the place where people first started rejecting the idea that we were kings should rule people, and instead asserted that people were capable of ruling themselves. That is one of the most important ideas that ever got let loose on this earth, and it got let loose here first. And that's what makes it, I think, doubly painful to watch that idea being now systematically trashed and undermined, and why we will do everything we can at third act to see, if we can still arrest some of that slide. But in the interim, I'm very glad that China is doing what it's doing for all the reasons that it's doing it. Some of them, entirely selfish, and some of them perhaps not.
Yeah, I shared with Bill earlier that I'd worried that China would be the one that would end up saving us, and that what would that mean if it took authoritarianism to save us? I said that, events overtook that concern. We now have the authoritarianism. We just lack the future vision that China has. I think we got to wrap it up and open it up to you folks for Q&A.
Can you talk about how batteries play into solar in terms of whether it's storage or otherwise? And are there concerns with rare minerals and all that stuff?
So batteries are a completely crucial part of this because it's funny, our Secretary of Energy, who spent his life as a fracking executive, tweeted out 2 weeks ago, solar power doesn't work when the sun goes down, It's like, yes, other people had actually noted that, over time. And so, we had this invention, the battery, to help deal with this. Batteries have gone plummeting down in price on the same steep curve as solar panels and wind turbines. And that plummeting price continues. It's really important, this is kind of an aside, but just to understand the difference between old energy and new energy. All the stuff that we've used all our lives, coal and gas and oil, are commodities, and you just get more of them and set them on fire. They were pretty cheap to begin with. They're still pretty cheap, although they get a little more expensive because you have to go further back in the mine to find the coal.
Or deeper in the ocean.
Yep. All the parts of renewable energy aren't like that. You do have to have some minerals to make them work, some lithium, say, or whatever, but it's an entirely different proposition. You go get some lithium, and we should mine it as sanely as it's possible to do it, but mining stuff is always going to be just gouging the earth to get stuff that you need, so it's never going to be great. But you put the lithium in a battery, and there it lasts for 25 years till the battery degrades. And now because lithium's valuable, we're good at recycling it. So you just get it out and start over again with the next battery. When you go mine coal, you set it on fire, and then you have to go mine some more the next day, which is why the Rocky Mountain Institute last September put out a study saying the amount of mining you'd have to do for the whole battery transition by 2050 is less than the amount of coal we mined last year on this planet. I sort of keep this in my mind by sort of as a mnemonic almost. A boatload full of solar panels over its lifetime will generate 500 times as much energy as the same boat filled with coal. That gives you some sense of just the change in kind that we're talking about here. So yeah, there's no free lunch here. You do have to mine some stuff, but there are definitely less expensive and more expensive lunches, and this is the less expensive by a large margin lunch, even before you count the cost of how much damage you do if you heat up the planet, and even if you ignore, which we shouldn't, but we often do, the fact that 9 million people die every year on this planet, 1 death in 5, just from breathing the particulates that come when you burn fossil fuel. And that's beginning to change. 10 years ago, the list of the dirtiest cities on planet Earth was all cities in China, one after another. Now there are no cities in China on that list. Not only are they much cleaner, I've talked to lots of people in the last 6 months. I haven't been to China for a little while, partly because I wrote a fair amount about Tibet, so I'm not sure that I'm completely allowed back in at the moment. I'll find out at some point. But I've talked to lots of friends in China in the last 6 months who say its cities are not only cleaner, they are much, much, much quieter than they were, because more than half the cars sold in China now come with a plug. That's what's, and within 3 years, it'll be 100% of cars sold in China, because they're the best. And if they were allowed to sell those cars in America, that you can buy a really good $10,000 EV in China right now. And if you have $30,000 to spend on a car, which is less than the American average for a new car, you can get a car better than any car you've ever dreamed of in China now. Detroit is not the center of the automotive world. As of about the last 18 months, it's 3 cities in China whose names are difficult for me to pronounce. That's where the cars that the rest of the world wants come from. So it's just fascinating.
There you covered 2 of the obstacles people will raise. One is storage and the other is mining.
Yep.
The third is land.
Yep.
So we
talked a little bit about agrivoltaics, but we're going to have to take up some land to do this. Mark Jacobson at Stanford, a great hero of all this work, says it's about 1.5–2% of the land surface of every country on Earth required to do this. That does not seem to me too much to take for producing this commodity that we use in such abundance, energy. Especially since we use huge amounts of our landscape for energy right now. The biggest crop in America by far is corn. We grow 60 million acres of it. 30 million of those acres are used to produce ethanol. The ethanol, the gasoline that we grow on those 30 million acres, provides 3% of America's energy. If you took that 30 million acres and covered it with solar panels, which is not what we want to do, because we don't want to just sort of carpet Indiana, to solar panels. But if you took that same 30 million acres and covered it in solar panels, it would produce not 3% of America's energy, but 100% of America's energy. This really was driven home to me last summer in a cornfield in Illinois, where I was with a farmer who was converting part of his farm to solar panels. He's like, look, acre is in corn, okay? It produces enough ethanol every year to drive my Ford F-150, most popular vehicle in America for the last 45 years, to drive it 25,000 miles. So not nothing. This acre over here, I'm putting in solar panels, okay? And it will produce enough electricity to drive my Ford F-150 Lightning, the EV version of the same truck, not 25,000 miles, but 700,000 miles, all right? Photosynthesis is a great miracle, but not a particularly efficient one. Solar panel is 20 times more efficient in taking the sun's energy and converting it. And as he also pointed out, I don't need to pour large quantities of nitrogen and phosphorus onto my solar panels to make them work. Stuff that washes quickly from Illinois down the Mississippi into the Gulf of Mexico, where it creates the vast dead zone that kills off all aquatic life. I don't need to strafe it with herbicides and pesticides to make the solar panels work. In fact, as we said before, we have half the field left to play with in interesting ways. Grow. One thing, you see a lot of good pictures of animals grazing in the shade between solar panels. If you have a mind to do this, it's a good thing to do. But one thing I did learn from talking to a number of people who've experimented with it is, do not put goats in your solar farm. They eat the cables, and they like to try jumping up on the solar panels. So anything but. Goats and solar energy, not a good mix.
Okay.
You heard it here.
All right. Hi, Terrence and Bill, good to see you both. Thank you for being here. There's a phrase that who controls the story rules. how do we get this story out knowing that this particular administration absolutely wants to control information?
Yes, they're doing a heavy-handed job of it at the moment. I mean, Trump-friendly billionaires are within a few weeks going to own CNN and TikTok. They've owned CBS. They've obviously intimidated ABC. The Washington Post has become a sad relic of the paper that once stood up to presidents. On and on down the list. So we have to do what we can. And we do have some advantages that we can work with in spreading information. So, for instance, Terrence has like 60% of Americans a podcast. And his is terrific and very much bears listening to, and there's a lot of other terrific ones too. It's become an independent way to spread information. I published this free Substack newsletter, probably because it's free. It has 100,000 people who get it every time I hit send, and 60% of them open it and hopefully read it. That's 100,000 approaches the circulation of a number of metropolitan dailies in this country. I mean, the LA Times, one of the great papers in our country historically, can't have more than 400,000 subscribers, 500. I doubt they even have that many, I fear, anymore. So we do have ways of getting information out, but it is harder than it should be. But you're right, the most important thing is control of the story, of the narrative. So you got to be good at telling that story. That's why I keep talking about alternative energy and why that's not the frame to use and how we're going to get past that. No guarantees, and the odds are obviously stacked against us, but weirdly, the polling continues to show that solar power is immensely popular and across party lines. The Trump guys have driven down some of the support among Republicans, but it remains very popular even among Republicans for the reasons I think that we were talking about before. They have a hard job. Nobody likes oil companies. Utilities, it's not just PG&E, utilities everywhere are completely unpopular, So it's not as if we have an impossible task here, just a difficult one.
Hey, Bill. You said that you're a beer guy. So am I. And I think beer is a great way to connect with people, especially those across the aisle. So my question is, what are some names that come to mind that you would like to have a beer with that can, from across the aisle, that can be potential climate champions?
I don't know about climate champions, and it's obviously a very difficult moment to cross, because Trump has done such a good job of intimidating so much of, and there's a kind of mean-spiritedness that's at work in the world, a kind of celebration of cruelty and things that makes it more difficult than it's ever been to have those conversations. But we do have to have them. So I don't think it's I look at the people I know who are good at having those conversations. Bernie, who is an old and dear friend, he's done a good job of going on Joe Rogan and talking about all kinds of things and meeting with a good reception. You need to have a kind of you need to be like, as Bernie is, grounded in a set of beliefs, which is a problem for, for whatever his uses and, abilities and things. Chuck Schumer is not grounded in a kind of worldview that makes it, I don't know what he would talk about if he went on Joe Rogan, so those kind of conversations have to happen. But I think that they are within the realm of possibility. it's been really interesting this year to watch the rise of Mamdani in New York, who's a fascinating political character, who's going to trounce the kind of old school, that Andrew Cuomo was the perfect representative of. And he's going to do it in part because he shares a certain, though they're 1,000% different, he shares certain of the things that made Trump a powerful political figure. He has a kind of energy about him. In his case, quite beautiful one. I mean, he clearly loves being in New York, which is a good thing. Even many of the people who run for mayor in our cities, their basic message is, this city is a hellhole, and only I can figure out how to. And he's like, he clearly loves where he is, and he's not the only one. I was just writing a little piece for the New Yorker these past days about. I think the Democrats are going to may find their future in these series of mayors around the country who are. We were just talking about my very favorite of them, Michelle Wu in Boston, who I think if we ever get our democracy back, will be president of the United States someday because she is a great politician and a great mayor. Boston has had like 11 murders so far this year. I mean, it's the safest city in the entire world. And not particularly ideological. I mean, a person of the left, but that's not why people, I think, are responding to. It would be a mistake to read what Mamdani is doing, his popularity, as yes, what we need to do is be super populist and progressive. We need to actually communicate with each other about things that are real, like affordability, And it's one of the things that I really like at the third act, I think, is that though we're all older, one of the kind of precepts that we really operate under, I think, is this desire to see a new generation of politicians and leaders and things arise. One of our jobs, I think, is going to be helping ease out of the limelight some of the very old people who, I remember when it was pretty clear that Dianne Feinstein probably shouldn't be doing her job anymore. We just wrote her a letter saying, you don't have to give up politics, come work with us. We're doing all kinds of fun stuff. Just let someone else, be senator for, a while and things like that. I think that's one of the roles that we've taken on. So I don't think that there's a conversation really to be had with the Trump administration and the people around them. I think they've made up their minds that they're going to go for power over everything, and I think their response to anyone who might interact with them begins with ridicule and scorn and moves quickly to putting them in jail. But I do think that there are deep conversations to be had about what we're going to do going forward. And that's one of the reasons that I like solar stuff so much. It's an example of the kind of place to have those conversations. And over beer, because there's now at least 20 solar-powered breweries in this country. So that's a very good thing. And it raises, it just automatically raises the possibility all the time.
What are the roadblocks to massive build-out of battery-backed solar?
The only roadblocks at this point are political. So that's why we do what we do. The best news here, that completely goes to your point, is that the state that's now surpassed California as the biggest builder of this stuff is Texas. And it's just sheer economics driving it. And it withstood a big challenge from big oil in the Austin legislature this spring. They introduced a whole series of bills designed to slow down this transition. The most prominent was one that people were calling DEI for natural gas, because it would have forced anybody who wanted to build 5 megawatts of solar to build 5 megawatts of natural gas at the same time, which is insane. But it was going to pass until people appeared out of the hinterlands, mostly rural Texas, saying, don't do this. This is how we pay the taxes in our county. This is what keeps the schools open in our rural county. And the legislature backed off. They returned to their project of redistricting to add seats for Trump. But they did not want to touch that anymore. The same thing on a smaller scale is very true of rooftop solar and solar on people's houses. And here is a place, truthfully, where California has done a poor job in the last few years, I think. And that the governor has made a series of decisions that killed off a great deal of the residential solar industry in California, which is a great shame because this is a perfect complement to the large-scale, utility-scale solar and things that California has done a much better job on. Among other things, just the sheer flexibility of having huge numbers of homes with California Utilities this summer tested what we call a virtual power plant, and about 100,000 Californians with batteries in their basements, they just, for the day, took control of them, combined them to see what they had, and what they had was a lot. In Vermont, where I live, the single biggest power plant we have is the virtual power plant of thousands of batteries in people's basements. So very cool stuff. Since we're not going to have federal subsidy anymore for rooftop solar, we're going to have to drive the cost down, and that's actually relatively easy to do. It costs 3 times more to put it on your house in this country than it does in Australia or the EU. A tiny bit of that's tariffs on panels. Mostly it's the fact that we have way too much bureaucracy in the way. There are 15,000 municipalities in this country. Each has their own building code. Each has their own team of inspectors to go crawl on your roof. It takes months often to do it. Everywhere else in the world, it's a matter of days. There's an app for it. The National Renewable Energy Lab put out this thing called the Solar App Plus. California has theoretically mandated its use, but you have to go to each town, each city, and really make sure that they're actually doing it, that allows for instant permitting. The most beautiful story along these lines, not the most numerically significant, but the most beautiful, is this rise of what we've been calling balcony solar. And it completely illustrates this point about regulation. 3 or 4 million Europeans in the last 3 years have gone to whatever you call Best Buy in Brussels and come home for a few €100 with a solar panel designed to be hung over the railing of your balcony. And then it just plugs into the wall with a standard plug. No electrician, no wiring, nothing, okay? It often produces 20%, 25% of the energy that a household uses. That's illegal everywhere in America, except the progressive bastion of Utah, where the state legislature...
That's right.
State legislature earlier this year voted unanimously to allow this on the grounds, as the state senator who did it, who we had a great talk with at Third Act, said, I see no reason why the people of Provo should be denied what the people of Stuttgart enjoy, And so yesterday in the Vermont legislature, we introduced balcony solar legislation, and I'm absolutely certain it will pass. And we don't have to wait for Sacramento. The city of Los Angeles the city of Santa Monica could quickly revise its code to allow people to do this, and should. Even with Washington in deeply unfriendly hands, there are a lot of things that we can be doing. And we are going to try to do that.
You make such a powerful case for this. I begin to wonder, I've been steeped in politics for decades, and I understand the industries, I understand the interest groups, I understand the power of the Koch brothers and all that stuff. But I also begin to wonder recently, why the hell can't we win? why can't the Democratic Party be the China of politics? I mean, what tools are we lacking? Are we so far behind in that we can lose to a Donald Trump? It's not like the Democrats don't have money. They have plenty of money. They have plenty of expertise. They have plenty of consultants. So I'm glad to hear you saying these things because I think you're looking for that answer, and I hope we all find it. But I am wondering what's stale in the Democratic Party that it can't get anywhere.
Stale is one of the right words here. I mean, it is painful to watch the National Democratic Party be unable to come up with a coherent response to the unbelievably obvious, attacks on the most fundamental things in our society. And it really is an unbelievable failure of messaging. The day that they shut down that wind farm off the coast of Rhode Island, there should have been 15 Democratic senators on a boat going out to that wind farm with as many TV crews as they could muster, and they should have been standing on those pylons, talking about just how much this was going to cost the people of New England to not have this cheap power supply. Last night when Jimmy Kimmel was fired, there should have been 20 Democratic representatives from across California standing up and telling, repeating every joke that Jimmy Kimmel had ever told about Donald Trump. There should have been a 6-hour joke-a-thon.
An I am Spartacus joke-a-thon.
Going on, on and on and on. None of this seems that difficult to me, but these guys are deeply ingrained in a tradition where the thing you do is, write letters and issue press releases. That's why what Mandani is doing is so interesting. He clearly understands that we live in a time when if you want to make a point, you better figure out an interesting way to do it. Last week, to illustrate the changes he wants to make in transit in New York, he raced the 34th Street bus across town and demonstrated that he could walk across Midtown Manhattan faster than the bus could go. And this is the kind of thing that people need to get good at. When we were taking on the banks at Third Act 2 years ago, in DC we had a big protest outside the banks, and we wanted to shut them down for the day, but partly because we're too old to sprawl on the sidewalk for hours at a time, but partly because we wanted to make a deeper point. We went to the Goodwill in Washington and got every rocking chair that they had and used hundreds of them to shut down the bank. And the next day there was a big story in the New York Times about the rocking chair rebellion against the banks that were underway. So this is the sort of thing that should be coming out of this city, because this is theoretically what y'all are good at here, And it's, true. I hope that it starts to emerge. I have no idea why the Jimmy Kimmel thing hasn't triggered every, actor and screenwriter or whatever to be doing clever things all day, and hopefully that'll start to happen. But yeah, your point is a very good one.
I'm just curious. I came to this area of study rather late. Can you give us an encapsulated version of your aha moment that started you?
You mean originally way back?
Yeah.
Around climate change.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I was talking about it with the kids today in here. My first job out of college was writing the Talk of the Town column for the New Yorker, and which back in those days was blissfully anonymous, and so it was fun, and I wrote most of it for
That's right, you did.
For 3 or 4 years. And the first long piece that I wrote for the New Yorker when I was 23, and it was very long because the New Yorker in those days had an appetite for extremely long pieces, was an account of where everything in my apartment at the corner of Bleecker and Broadway came from. So I followed every line, like, you know, the electric line. I was in Brazil looking at oil that Con Ed was buying, and in the Arctic looking at the big dam, hydroelectric dams at Hudson Bay that they were getting power from, and in the Grand Canyon watching them mine uranium. And I was out along the New York City water supply system, which is one of the real 7 wonders of the world, you know, and with the garbage barges and you know, on and on and on. And it had the effect of instructing me on the fact that the world is a physical place, something that as a good child of the suburbs, I really had never contemplated before, because the American suburb is a machine to hide the operation of the physical world from you, you know. Where does the water come from? Who knows? It comes from the tap, you know. And that sense that the world was a physical place meant that the world was a vulnerable place in ways that I hadn't understood. So that just happened to be the same couple of years that if you were reading the scientific journals, the first real important papers about climate change started coming out. And I read them in a different way than I otherwise would have had I not spent that year doing that piece. I was struck by the vulnerability that we were going to be exposed to as the temperature began to warm. And so that's why I wrote The End of Nature when I did. And that was the kind of, you know, that was one of the insights that drove it, because half of it was reporting on climate, and the other half, it's an odd book, the other half is a kind of, you know, amateur philosophical, lay theological reflection on what it feels like, what it would feel like to live in a world that was where humans were taking control of where there would be no such thing as wild nature anymore. And that really was a result of the fact that I, at 25, had moved to the Adirondack Mountains, the great wilderness of the American East, and was living deep in the woods and absolutely in love with that wild place in a way that I'd never been in love with a landscape before. And so I was feeling very deeply the kind of potential loss of that world. It hadn't happened yet, but one of the reasons that there are writers in the world is to try and imagine what things will feel like, you know. And it was a period of extraordinary angst for me. Really was very, very hard psychologically to deal with it. But I got through it, you know, in a sense, I guess. And it's, I think, one of the reasons that I've been able to spend 35 years kind of dealing with the, you know, on a day-to-day basis with this and organizing around it and dealing with the very dark subject that it is, because I had faced up to what seemed to me the worst possible sense of it at an early point, and was sort of inoculated, not completely. And I'm still subject to the sadness of it sometimes, often, but not debilitating anymore. So those were for me, the aha moments. And a result of all of that, I'll just add, is that and I was talking about this with the kids today, I'm very sensitive to the fact that the world is still, despite all this, a very beautiful place. And that we are the creatures capable of noticing and appreciating and that beauty, and that's one of our jobs. So I, you know, never, if there's a snowstorm in Vermont, man, I make absolutely full use of it. I'm out in it as much as I can and soak it up. It's as lovely as it is to be here with you all. I'm exquisitely aware of the fact that the leaves are turning even as we speak in the hills of Vermont, and I wish I was there to see them, and on and on and on. So make of that what you will, but for me, that's been a key insight of all of this too, that the world is never going to be more intact than it is right now. So we might as well pay some witness to that, even as we're doing what we can to keep it as intact as we still can.
Thank you very much, Bill. Thank you, Terence.
Again, the book is Here Comes the Sun, and the websites are billmckibben.com and thirdact.org. This episode was recorded as a LiveTalksLA in-person event, September 18th, 2025 in Santa Monica, California. I've had the pleasure of participating in conversations for them many times over the years, including with Michael Lewis, Yuval Noah Harari, and Doris Kearns Goodwin. You can learn more about their past and future events at LiveTalksLA, all one word, livetalksla.org. And you can link to this conversation and all of those others by going to youtube.com/livetalksla/videos. youtube.com/livetalksla/videos, and then scroll down. For this conversation and many other interviews and articles, and to join me in pursuit of a world that just might work, go to TerenceMcNally.net, TerenceMcNally, all one word, TerenceMcNally.net, or aworldthatjustmightwork.com. They're the same website. If you want to receive my weekly email announcement telling you who's going to be on, what we're going to talk about, plus links to probably 10 or 15 articles to flesh out the conversation, email me at temcnally, TEMCNALLY, @mac.com. You can also subscribe and listen to the Freeform podcast on Apple Podcasts and most major podcast sites. You'll find years of podcasts at my site or at those other sites. Archives include Naomi Klein, Van Jones, Doris Kearns Goodwin, George Packer. You can also follow me on Twitter at McNally-Terence. Thanks to LiveTalksLA and Ted Hoptegaber, and to Kiana Williams in production, and George Vasilopoulos at Progressive Voices, and most of all to you, my listeners. Please share this podcast widely.